Call with roughly 150 odd councils and Parks Trust, people from the Amenity Forum, etc. Some of you were probably on that call, and there was a question about how weed management becomes, integrated weed management particularly, becomes more economically stable over time and becomes cheaper over time. And that's one of the big questions I wanted to try and address in this presentation. I didn't do a good enough job, I don't feel, in the couple of minutes I had to go through it on the call. So we've got North Lincolnshire Council here today, and they have an interesting case study from a couple of months ago. They were clearing back some A roads, the pavements on the side of the road. You can see in the picture there was quite a lot of encroachment, and to be fair, that's not really untypical. If you drive up and down a lot of the A roads in the UK, lots of them look very similar. So we've established that the build-up of soil was over about 25 years, and they're removing that in one go. So in 1 mile of pavement, there was roughly 100 tonnes of soil removed, which is quite a colossal amount of material, and obviously takes an awful lot of sweepers to go and pick that up. It's a lot of waste disposal, and that soil is what all the weeds are growing in on that area. So you can see in the picture before, it's full of grass and full of other plants taking up that space. And mostly today we're going to be focusing on the weeds that are on hard surfaces, and it's one of the biggest areas of use. There was a study in Scotland a little while ago that was showing that the majority of the pesticides that's used by councils is used on hard surfaces or the area where they join a soft surface, so the encroachment, and where these are often just sprayed off. So to picture that 100 tonnes of soil, it's about 75 cubic metres. So if you put that in your local leisure complex, my AI generated picture thinks it would look something like this. So that's the first year of soil removal, and that's a big thing. So whenever people go and do trials, it's typically done over a year. And what you'll usually have is perhaps you've had glyphosate and you've had acetic acid and you've tried hot foam or some collaboration of the other solutions. And by testing them individually in an area where you've got already, it may not need to be 100 tonnes in a mile, but any of the soil build-up that we see, and you're not removing that, you're missing a huge part of the equation as to what can make things cheaper over time. So the soil accumulation over the following year that you would need to get rid of if weed brushing and sweeping was your principal activity for weed management would be about 3 cubic metres would be the build-up on that road if you divide the 75 cubic metres by 25 to give you a year's worth, which looks a lot more like that, which is a bit more manageable to pick up in a sweeper and dispose of. It takes a lot less people, a lot less time, and a lot less money and resources. So before weed brushing, in that 75 cubic metres of soil, doing some quick maths, the dry weight of some average types of weeds that you might find in that environment would add up to about 9.5 tonnes dry weight, so that's once you've dried out the material, of weeds to deal with. Now that's a colossal amount of treatment of whatever you're doing across just 1 mile of pavement. If you come to the next year, so the year 2 after you weed brush, you're treating just 380 kilos dry weight of material. So you're still going to get weeds, of course, you're still going to get detritus coming up, but the weeds you then have to treat, the volume of it is tiny in comparison to what you've been treating in the previous years. So if you're neglecting your weed brushing and sweeping, you're possibly using about 90 to 95% more chemical or more treatment of any other kind than you need to. And weed brushing is a treatment I looked after about a mile of pavement in Loch Carron up in the northwest Highlands. And it took me about a long weekend the first time to do everything with a weed brush, clean it all up into wheelbarrows and get rid of the material. The second time I needed to do it was 2 years later, and instead of about 18 inches of soil to remove, there was about 2. So that took me about a day to clear up by myself with no team. So the difference is colossal, not just in theory, but in real life situations, and that's something I think we need to get people in the UK focusing a lot more on. I've been trying to get Wokingham Council, my local council, to do some of this near me for the last year and a half, and not a single sweeper has gone past the roads I've complained about for the whole time. I'm not saying you're all that bad. But, soil depth also makes a huge difference to the types of weeds you get. So we'll come on to what hot water and air, etc. works best on later on, but in deeper soil you get more deeper rooted plants, just because they have more mechanical support, more nutrients to support those plants. So if you're leaving soil on the pavements, you're going to get more things like plantain, dandelions, brambles, nettles, thistles, all sorts of things with deeper roots, bigger foliage, more to treat and kill. In 2019, in Arizona, there was some research done on this, on the rocky outcrops over there. They've got a lot of pitting in the soil, and there was some nice zonation that they had. So in the centre of this big pit with soil about that deep, they had trees growing, and I'm sure you've probably all seen along the M4, for example, where there's been quite a big soil build-up on the central reservation. We've now got ash trees taller than my van growing in the middle of the road. In shallower soil, you're going to then get, instead of woodier plants, you're going to get perennials and things that are juicier and slightly easier to kill. And then in shallow soil still, you'll just get annuals and you'll get mosses. And by weed brushing and removing that soil, not only does it remove the amount of volume of soil, it also then removes a lot of the depth. So you change the types of weeds you're dealing with, which is really important. So you go from something like the pavement on the left, quite typically, to something, if you left it for the entire year, probably more like the pavement on the right. But I expect you'll probably do some form of treatment in the middle. So what does that mean for using heat? Well, this is an example of heat, so this is hot water. If you're trying to treat large perennial plants with heat, you're going to use a colossal amount of energy and time, because you have to dose each plant to cover it. So the amount of time that takes is hugely dependent on how big the plant is. So there's a couple of things you can do. One is, obviously, if you remove the soil, you're then treating annuals and things with much smaller root systems, which can store a lot less energy, so your number of treatments will be much less. The other thing you can do is to treat early. So when we treat early, one of the things we're doing is we're treating things that are much smaller, so you can just pass over them very quickly with alternatives like heat. So you take a lot less time, critically a lot less energy, a lot less fuel usage and that kind of thing. The other thing you're doing with heat and the ability to treat early, you can treat in any weather, so you can treat early. You can get on, I know we've had a lovely spring, but often we don't get blessed with such nice weather and it's very difficult to spray. But you can be treating from when a plant is tiny, and heat will work on anything from a germinating seed up to a large plant. But if you can get them when they're germinating and just small, you'll save so much time. And the other thing you'll do is you'll knock out the seed bank. So heat will with some seeds, it will knock out the seeds. With other seeds, you'll wake up the dormant seeds that are in the soil. And then if you go back a couple of weeks later when they're starting to emerge, you can knock out that whole array of perhaps thousands of plants who've woken up and eradicate a lot of the seed bank, which is something that chemicals aren't capable of doing. So if you're knocking out the nutrients, you're knocking out the seed bank, you've got yourself back on the front foot, which is something that most of you in the trials that people have carried out haven't done. And they've then started on the back foot, often at the same schedule in which they might treat a plant with glyphosate. So your first spray might even be in May or something like that, and your first treatment with heat might be in May, whereas really we should be using the weed brushing over the winter to clear all that soil and the potential for the weeds, then using the heat as early as possible in the spring when the things start coming up. So as early as the picture I took there of the chickweed, that was in February. So you can get it as early as February, well before they go to seed. The next thing we can then start doing once you're on top of that kind of thing is managing the surrounding vegetation. So one of the things you'll see in the car park in Highbury Hall, well, we cleared that about 4 weeks ago, and it's still, the edges are still clean around the car park, etc. But you'll notice there's an awful lot of leaves fallen on the surface, which we'd gotten rid of previously. Well, that leaf fall is dependent on how much vegetation you've got surrounding and what type of vegetation you have surrounding the area. So to prevent so much soil build-up, we need to prevent things degrading and becoming soil on the surface. So if you can keep what you have trimmed back and make sure you're reducing the amount of foliage that they have, that's a start. Picking up things like if you've got grass, if you can cut and collect as much as possible, especially the meter just on the edge of the pavement, that makes a huge difference. But if we can also start thinking about what types of plant we use adjacent to hard surfaces, that makes a huge difference as well. There's lots and lots of low litter species of ground cover plants, of hedges, of trees, that we can choose in places that are adjacent to hard surfaces to make the maintenance easier, as well as in the design of that hard surface so that you're making it easier to sweep along the edges, for example. And how often do you actually sweep? Well, it would be interesting to, Cambridge, who you'll speak to later, have got a land management audit system, and I'm sure that kind of thing is quite common, where you can check the state of the roads. Wokingham assured me they've got a sweeping schedule that covers the roads that I was talking about once every 7 weeks. Judging by the litter that's there, that's been exactly the same litter that was there a year and a half ago, I would doubt that sweeping regime is in place, so, or being carried out thoroughly. So one of the things that a lot of you have the power to control is that the schedule that people are supposed to be doing is actually done, and checking and making sure that what you think is happening is happening. The other thing that we can do by instigating this kind of weed management program is we can tackle some other huge challenges beyond weeds. So a lot of things that you also have to deal with, or your councillors are asking to deal with. Things like reducing flood risk. Hull City Council, I think it was back in 2007, they had a massive flood event, and the flooding was put down to a lack of maintenance of the drainage systems. And one person actually died trying to clear out his local drain, and he got trapped in there and drowned. And ever since they put in a bit more of a thorough maintenance regime for the drains and for sweeping. And they've also instigated something called the Love Your Neighbourhood campaign, which we've featured in the case study hub, which I suggest you have a look at, and they've got lots online about it. It's been a brilliant public awareness campaign, and is bringing a lot of Hull up to the conditions we're talking about. But keeping the channels clear that then run into these drains will mean you'll spend an awful lot less on gully sucking when it comes time to that. So I know I was speaking to Nottinghamshire Council the other day, and they reckoned they were spending £250,000 hiring a machine for 6 months to suck gullies. Well, if we can eliminate some of that by improving our sweeping regime, that's got to be a dual saving for a start. This was a typical drain in Reading, unfortunately. So we uncovered this by sweeping, but the drain has suffered from quite a few years of not being swept, and it's full to the brim with soil, so no water is going to escape through there. The next thing it does is it will make your surfaces last a lot longer. So one of the things we reveal a lot of the time when we're weed brushing is a lot of freeze-thaw damage. And why that's happening is because the soil build-up is holding a lot of moisture in the surface. So your surfaces are never drying out properly. And then you get to winter and you get a freeze-thaw process and you get cracks in the surface. And that creates big pockets that fill with more soil and more water, open up, and that gives space for these deeper-rooted perennial plants to establish. So you'll often notice the crack along the very edge of the road is the place where most of the weeds are coming up, and the deeper-rooted types of weeds. If you can spend a little bit of time exposing those with a weed brush and then sealing them, ideally, I know budgets are tight and things like that, but either keeping them clean or sealing them, that will save a lot of money in the long run on replacing roads. We can encourage pride in our communities, so the experience of Hull, I really recommend you looking at that. So one of the main goals was that they would get the residents to love their neighbourhood again. And people get so disenchanted with a neighbourhood that's filled with fly tipping and litter and encroachment, and it makes such a difference to see a clean edge and have less soil on the pavement and not have brown sprayed edges. AI produced a nice picture for me. I didn't have to go and take a picture of somebody in a wheelchair. But we see this kind of example quite a lot, and it was just to emphasise the point that a lot of this soil makes it very difficult for people using wheelchairs or pushing prams to use the paths. So the added benefit of instead of just killing the plants on the surface, of removing the soil, is you give proper access again to that path to wheelchair users and pram users and other people who find mobility a bit more difficult. We have now much stricter guidelines for the width of paths coming in, new paths that are being built, and it's worth making sure that we keep them because they're specified at that width for a reason. The other thing, one of the last things I've put on is we can improve the air and water quality. So a lot of the targets for reducing air and water quality come from heavy metals that are produced by cars, etc., on the side of the road. And when you're removing a lot of that's getting trapped in the curb edge in the soil. And by removing that, sweeping, you're reducing an awful lot of those heavy metals and making sure they don't become airborne or waterborne, carried into the water in the drains. So we can improve the quality of our air and water by sweeping. And we've got quite a few tools which we'll hopefully go and see outside later, but I'll just run you through quickly to give you an idea of what these are. So the guys in France from Ripgreen have developed a hot air system that works in a very similar fashion in terms of the user to a knapsack. So you have a lance and either a knapsack of gas on your back or a trolley to carry around more on. It means it's very mobile and you can use it anywhere in spaces behind social housing or along walls, open gravel paths. There's a lot in cemeteries and things like that. The thing with this kit, which you'll hopefully get from today, is having the right bit of kit in the right place makes an awful lot of difference. And one heat solution is not the same to another heat solution. So making sure you're using it in the right way, using it in the right places, and your operatives on the ground know what that is as well and what they're expected of, is very important. So getting to see some of this kit later will hopefully give you a good idea of the capabilities and extremities of some of these bits of kit. Hot water, so the hot air uses the gas. You've got 6% gas to 94% air, so it's burning very cleanly, but there's a flame. And there's some places you can't use a flame. So along the bottoms of hedges, plant nurseries and things are a good example because they use a lot of MyPEX, and I know some of you are councils and things, and some have their own growing areas and that kind of thing. So hot water is a safer system to use around those areas where you've got a lot of unavoidable detritus build-up that's dry, that's difficult to get rid of, or plants very close to the ground. And the other thing that you've got the benefit of is that hot water can penetrate into soil. So if you're thinking about surface like block paving, it drains very quickly, but if you've got a soil build-up on a hard surface, it's going to retain that moisture. So what tool you choose to use on those different surfaces might be very different. And electricity would perhaps be the right tool to use on the block paving I was talking about. What we tend to find with hot water and hot air is because the hot air tends to work on the foliage, which is great for treating annuals and mosses, and will work on that type of thing if you removed a lot of the soil. Hot water will work on deeper perennials if you can keep the water there. And that gives you a little bit more extended type of plant you can use it on, but on block paving, for example, the water drains quite quickly. And what you'll tend to find is you'll go from an area that's covered in moss and grass to an area that might be covered in dandelions, because the tap roots aren't surrounded by the water long enough to kill the tap roots. So electricity will kill the plant through the whole root. It's using a system whereby you've got two electrodes and the electricity is going from one to the other using the plant as the conduit. So it's finding the quickest way back to the second electrode. And that boils the plant from the inside. So each different system has its own use and its own place and its own benefits and drawbacks when you're looking at speed, cost, accessibility to different areas, the type of people you need to use them, etc. And we can also now deal with invasive species. So one of the biggest problems over the last few years with switching away to alternatives has been Japanese knotweed, for example, or giant hogweed. And we now have quite a lot of research showing, and local success stories showing the success of using electricity for treating invasive weeds. So the root wave, which is now called the Kersten weeding lance, electric weeding lance, was developed in the UK and now in Germany. And this system, you have the positive and negative electrode quite some distance away from each other, and it's able to create a massive loop under the ground which will kill plants even with very deep rhizome systems that extend a long way, where other solutions haven't been able to in the past. We've also been doing a lot of technological developments, our suppliers have, so now a lot of the systems are a lot more energy efficient than they used to be. We've got a lot of electric kit. Here's an example which North Lincolnshire have been using earlier. This is one of their chaps proudly standing behind it. And this is a fully electric two-wheel tractor, and the batteries on the weed brush should last more than a day doing types of work that they were doing earlier. So that's quite a revolution in terms of usage time from this type of equipment, and that's getting better across the whole suite of things we'll show you today. We've got some good examples outside. We've also got new technical developments as well. So, for example, there's an edging disc now available on the side of the weed brush. So where it might be in parks, you need to leave a nice crisp edge, and we used to do the weed brushing and then someone would go up with an edging disc afterwards in a separate operation. We can now do the two in one operation and save a lot of time. We've got mounted weed brushes, some of which work in the same way, pulling the material into the road, which you then sweep up. We've also got now a weed brush that moves the material back onto the verge. So if you're doing a lot along the highway or along an open area where you've got lots of grass you can clear the detritus onto, this will save an awful lot of clean-up operation. And we have mounted sweepers. We've got some being used, these are brand new, but we've got some being used by South Lanarkshire. I think there's somebody from South Lanarkshire here today. And they're full width sweepers with weed brushes. So if you've got areas of block paving, for example, with heavy build up like this, then it's a very efficient way of removing all that detritus from the surface and makes it much quicker than the standard weed brushes have a certain width, and this is giving you about 1.3 meters to play with. So we're speeding up all the time what you can do, and we also have sweepers we'll show you later on that collect the material as well, especially for compact areas that are difficult to access with the large sweepers. Gravel is a massive problem for a lot of you, and somewhere that's difficult to get a sweeper in, but we do have machines for that as well. So this is a path grader, and what it does is there's a couple of different types, but it rips up the surface, and then using the material it's ripped up, it grades that into all the holes. So if you've got an area with potholes, it will deal with the potholes on the gravel. It will also deal with the weeds and collect them in the bucket system. I think I've talked a lot about that this one. So hopefully for a lot of you, your integrated weed management journey starts here today. And one of the best ways I can recommend you starting, other than coming here and enjoying the day and taking a lot out of it, is if you want something that's specific to you, we've got an integrated weed management assessment online. If you scan the QR code either on the screen or it'll be there all day, that'll take you to a page where you can take the assessment. There's about 25 questions about your specific area and what you do, what types of equipment you already might use, and it will give you a lot of quick and ready information to be able to start building an integrated weed management plan, which you'll hear a bit more about later. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that was helpful and insightful. I hope I didn't drone on too much. Have you got any questions? Yes.
Do you, with the weed brush, do you experience damage to the surface? There's quite a corrosive effect.
Yeah, so it's a two-part thing to answer really. No, on a new surface, generally we don't experience damage. What it typically does is revealing the freeze-thaw damage I was talking about earlier. So if you've got a degraded path that's already got freeze-thaw damage that's under this soil, you will reveal the damage that's there. It's not going to damage it any more than it's already damaged, but obviously if it's loose it's going to take it out. So my advice where it comes to that is don't avoid removing the soil because you think you're going to expose damaged surface, because you're far better exposing it, letting it dry out, or it's going to degrade quicker and be damaged quicker than if you brush it. If you keep a street brushed from clean to begin with, you'll get a lot less damage over time than if you leave it covered by the soil.
I think the second bit of the answer to that is there are so many adjustments on the weed brushes themselves, and ways of trying to follow the contours. So where a lot of these machines have been built is Holland, Germany, where it's a little bit flatter than here, and so it's a little bit easier. So we do have a little bit more of a challenge to follow those ups and downs, nooks and crannies. We've got a lot older surfaces than some of those that are over there, so it is a challenge. But there are so many adjustments on the machines that can be made. There's different types of brushes. We've got the steel brushes, we've got the nylon brushes, so which can be used in so many different ways. I think the benefit of us being Kersten UK is that we've been able to feed so many of the applications back to the factory, and they've come up with solutions, or we've come up with solutions, and we've had some development back that's really applies specifically to the UK and our particular things.